without effort. It will not give you formulas to reach the kingdom. It will show you that you never left it. And from that recognition, the soul will cease to strive to be holy and will begin to remember that it has always been whole, not by merit, but by origin. Here, you will not learn to use God as a tool. You will learn to stop using the self as an obstacle. Here, it is not about improving your story. It is about gently dissolving it in the light so that what you truly are can finally be lived without interruption. Nothing of what you are in Christ has been lost. It has only been veiled, and this book is a hand that removes that veil, not with violence, but with certainty, not with anxiety, but with reverence. Because what has been waiting for you is not outside. It is within you, silent, unalterable, waiting for you to stop searching and begin to dwell. Then we will make no more requests. We will only affirm, I am in the Father, and the Father is in me. And in this moment, only what God is exists, and that is who I am. The consciousness of Christ is not attained, it is remembered. And in this book, we will remember the consciousness of Christ, living from the source, not from the self. By Emmett Fox. We have noticed that more than 80% of those who visit our channel are not subscribed. You can support this project by pressing the subscribe button and liking the video. Thank you for inspiring us to continue creating more and better content for you. Are you ready to transform your life? Chapter 1, Beyond Right Thinking, Living from the Being. The one who remains in me and I in him bears much fruit, because apart from me, you can do nothing. Jesus of Nazareth. There comes a point in the spiritual journey where positive thinking is no longer enough. There is a moment when repeating truths no longer transforms, because the soul senses that the problem is not in the ideas it holds, but in who it believes itself to be, the one who holds them. This is that point. For a long time, we have trained the mind to correct its course. We have replaced the narrative with affirmations of good. We have watched our words, disciplined our emotions, chosen higher thoughts, and all of that has been useful. But if consciousness does not take the next step, transformation stagnates, because thinking well is not the same as living from the being. You can think of love and still feel separated. You can affirm abundance and continue vibrating in need. You can declare unity and still judge from the identity of the self. Because correct thinking alone is not enough. Only when thought arises from the being, from the consciousness of unity with God, does it carry the creative power of truth. Jesus did not think rightly to create miracles. He lived from the consciousness of Christ, from the indivisible, non-dual being. He didn't need to convince himself that something was possible. He knew that nothing real could be absent, and from that state he spoke, decided, and acted, not as one seeking a connection, but as one who knew that he was never disconnected. The difference is total. Correct thinking seeks to change what it perceives. Thought from the being recognizes what has always been. One struggles, the other reveals. This is what it means to live from the inner Christ. It is not about modifying your inner dialogue to feel better. It is about undoing the belief that you are a separated God who needs to improve. It is about looking from the eternal, from the already fulfilled, from what needs no justification. As long as thought is guided by the ego, even a spiritual ego, it will remain limited. It may sound good, it may bring temporary results, but it cannot sustain true peace, because peace does not arise from thought. It arises from the being, and the being is God in you, not as an idea, but as the only reality. Living from the being does not mean thinking less, but thinking from a different place, not from memory, but from presence, not from reaction, but from vision, not from the desire to control, but from the certainty that everything is contained in the aura. And how do you get there? Not by fighting, not by perfecting the self, but by surrendering it, gently, deeply, honestly. When you stop using the mind to manufacture results and allow the spirit to think through you, everything changes. You no longer create from form. You allow the essence to express everything through you. This is living from the being, not as an occasional state of meditation, but as a constant identity, not as effort, but as sacred rest in what you already are. Be silent, close your eyes, and do not try to think well. Just remember, what I am does not need to be fixed. What I am is not incomplete. What I am is already one with God, and from there, my life is revealed. You no longer need so many affirmations. One is enough when it comes from the being. I am. And from that I am, everything else finds its place. Not because you organize it, but because order is the nature of the being when it is finally recognized. Chapter 2. Christ is not a figure, he is a frequency. Before Abraham was, I am. Jesus of Nazareth. For centuries, the name of Christ has been wrapped in theological garments, loaded with symbols, worshipped from a distance, and debated from creeds. He has been painted in temples, named on altars, and defined in treatises, yet few have experienced his true nature. Christ is not a historical figure, but an eternal frequency. Jesus embodied that frequency, lived it, expressed it without interruption, but did not possess it exclusively. He did not come to say, "Worship me." He came to say, "What I am, you also are." And that is the stone that many have rejected, that Christ is not a proper name, but a vibration that dwells in every being, waiting to be recognized, activated, and lived. The consciousness of Christ is a state of the soul, not a religious faith, not a sacred lineage, not an ancient story. It is the highest vibration possible in human consciousness, the point where the ego completely silences itself and truth becomes the only voice. To say Christ is to say humility, presence, non-duality. It is to look at the world without separation, to think without judgment, to live without defense, to act without a personal agenda, to be without the need to represent anything. The error has been to take Christ as a figure and not as a state, admiring the messenger and forgetting the message, creating distance from what is truly your deepest identity. Christ is not a body, not a cross, not a doctrine. He is a frequency, a pure, silent, firm, and loving vibration that already resides within you. It does not need to be created. It only needs you to clear everything else so that it can take the throne of your consciousness. How do you recognize this frequency? Not by emotions, not by mystical experiences, but by the state of presence, by the inner attitude that needs no proof, by the clear vision that does not judge, but understands, by the peace that does not depend on what happens, by the love that demands no return. This is the frequency of Christ, and it is active now. Not when you finish your process, not when you clean your mistakes, not when you understand all the spiritual books, but only when you stop seeking Jesus outside and begin to see Christ within. This is not irreverence, it is total reverence. Honoring Jesus is not repeating his name, it is replicating his consciousness. He did not come to be idolized, he came to be remembered within you. And when this frequency becomes your foundation, everything else falls into order. Thought becomes clear, the body responds to peace, relationships cease to be struggles, time becomes eternal because you no longer dwell in form but in essence. From there is no rush, no lack, no noise, only clarity, only certainty, only I am. Be silent, not to seek something but to make space for what has always been. And in the depths, I am not the character, I am not the past, I am not the story. I am the frequency of Christ recognizing itself in me. And stay there. Do not think about it, inhabit it. Do not explain it, live it. Because when the frequency of Christ is your base state, there is nothing left to attain, only to manifest what you already are. Chapter 3. From Awakening to Permanence, How to Dwell in the Spirit Without Interruption. Abide in me and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit of itself except it abide in the vine, no more can ye except ye abide in me. Jesus of Nazareth. Awakening is a sacred moment, a moment of clarity in which the mind opens, the heart expands, and the soul remembers, if only for a second, what it truly is. It is like a flash of lightning that cuts through the darkness of conditioned thought and reveals the face of God in all things. But that moment, no matter how beautiful, is not the destination. It is only the door. Many have had moments of awakening, have felt the unity, have understood love, have seen with the clear eye, but then sometimes in minutes, sometimes in days, they return to the noise, the division, the same old struggle. Why does this happen? Because awakening is not yet permanence. The ego does not fear an occasional glimpse, but it trembles at a consciousness that stabilizes. Dwelling in the Spirit is the true path. Not touching the light from time to time, but living from it without interruption. Not remembering your truth only in meditation or in reading, but holding it in the midst of traffic, in the uncomfortable conversation, in the formless moment. And this is not achieved by effort. It's not about trying harder. It's about letting go deeper, about stopping the oscillation of I spirit, do spirit, and establishing Christ consciousness as the only base, not as a special state, but as the natural state. Jesus did not reconnect with the Father. He remained because he did not live from a spiritualized ego, but from the undivided being. He did not have to remember his humility, because there was no way for him to forget it. This is the destiny of every awakened soul, to transition from occasional access to presence to the stability of being. How does this transition happen? It doesn't happen as a sudden leap. It happens as a constant re-education of the focus of attention. Every time you return to the present moment, without history, without judgment, without name, you are cultivating permanence. Every time you choose to see from the spirit, even though the ego cries out, you are affirming, I no longer return to the old I remain in the truth, even though I don't understand, even though I don't feel, even though I don't see. And this fidelity to the present moment is what deepens the anchoring, until the spirit is no longer visited, but inhabited, until practice becomes nature, until you no longer have to remember who you are because there is no forgetting. This does not mean that old thoughts won't arise, but they will no longer have roots. They will come as echoes, and you will see them pass like clouds in a sky that can no longer be covered. To remain is not to isolate yourself. It is to be fully in the world without being confused by it. It is to wash the dishes from eternity. It is to walk from peace. It is to speak without weight. It is to look with the clear eye, even when others still cannot. And that remaining is the fruit of true awakening, not what happens in a mystical moment, but what is cultivated in the day-to-day, in the everyday, in the invisible, in the subtle. Do you want to know if you are remaining? Observe yourself. Are you interpreting from history or from silence? From the I that needs or from the being that already is? Every time you choose presence over reaction, truth over drama, peace over argument, you have remained. And in that moment, Christ in you has again taken the throne. Make remaining your only purpose. Everything else will be added. The body aligns, time adjusts, relationships clarify, decisions flow, because the spirit doesn't need you to help. It only needs you not to leave. And in that permanence, you don't perform miracles. You are the miracle. You don't transmit light. You become the light. You don't invoke peace. You are the peace that has remembered it was never anything else. And that memory no longer gets interrupted. Chapter 4. The illusory self dissolving the identity fabricated by the world. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will find it. Jesus of Nazareth. There are few teachings more radical, more challenging, and more necessary than this one. Most people want to improve their lives, but not transform their identity. They seek peace without abandoning the struggle, truth without surrendering their ideas, light without letting go of the darkness. But there is a narrow gate through which no one can pass while carrying the idea they have of themselves, and that gate is the dissolution of the self. The self we cling to is not the I am of the spirit. It is a construct, an image shaped by the world, reinforced by personal history, fed by comparison, and protected by the memory of pain. It is the self that says, this is what I am, this is what happened to me, this is what I need. And as long as this self guides life, true freedom is not possible because that self is the veil, and the veil prevents us from seeing the face of Christ. Jesus did not come to decorate the self. He did not come to polish it, elevate it, or spiritualize it. He came to dissolve it. He came to show that what the world calls identity is nothing more than a fiction sustained by fear, a defense crafted to survive in a world that has forgotten who it is. And his calling was clear. Deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me. What does this mean in the consciousness of the spirit? It means renouncing your personal idea, letting go of the image, stopping living from the mask, and allowing the real being, the Christ within you, to take the place it rightfully occupies. This is not self-annihilation, it is self-revelation, because only when the false identity dissolves can the eternal identity emerge, and that identity does not need to defend itself, does not need to be right, does not need to achieve anything, it simply is. Who are you when you are not defined by your name, your story, your body, your occupation, your wounds, or your accomplishments? Who remains when all titles, labels, and memories that you believe compose you fall away? What remains is God living in you. That is Christ, that is the I am. That is what you have always been, but did not know, because the illusory self occupied the stage. The illusory self is noisy. It speaks a lot, always defending its position, justifying its actions, seeking validation. It has a constant hunger for recognition. It lives comparing itself, feeling superior or inferior, but never at peace, because its foundation is not love. It is fear. And fear can only fabricate identity. It cannot remember the truth. That is why the false self is always changing, unstable, contradictory, fragile. It needs to construct and reconstruct its image to feel secure. But the soul knows that security is temporary. And as long as you identify with that version of yourself, you will keep walking in circles. The illusory self is not your enemy. It is a mechanism, a temporary structure of thought formed to give you continuity in the world. But there comes a moment when it no longer serves, when it is no longer necessary. And if it is not let go, it becomes a prison. That moment has come. Christ consciousness cannot flourish in a soul identified with the character. Truth cannot be revealed through a mind that still needs to be right. That is why the spiritual path is not about improving yourself. It is the end of the self as the center. It is the birth of being as the only truth. How is the illusory self dissolved? First, with recognition. You cannot undo what you have not yet seen. You need to observe yourself without judgment, recognizing when you speak from the character, when you decide from the wound, when you act from the need to protect an image. And by observing without condemning, the self begins to lose its power because it feeds on reaction but cannot survive in the light of consciousness. Second, with surrender. You cannot hold on to your idea of yourself and simultaneously hold on to the light of the Spirit. Sooner or later, one must give way. And surrender is not defeat, it is liberation. Surrender to the truth. Say to the Spirit, show me who I am without this story, without this name, without this defense, without this habit of suffering. Show me my true face, the one I had before the world told me who I should be. Third, with permanence. It's not about having moments of clarity. It's about dwelling in the truth as your only identity. And when the self tries to return, do not feed it. Observe it as an old reflection you no longer need. Do not repress it or deny it. Simply say with loving firmness, thank you for what you were, but now Christ lives in me, and he is my only identity. Fourth, with presence. The only way not to return to the illusory self is to live fully in the aura. The character only exists in psychological time, in the past, which repeats, and in the future, which fears. But in the now there is no character. There is only being, only truth, only God. Make this a living practice. Upon awakening, do not resume your story. Resume your being. Before speaking, ask yourself, who is speaking, the self or the spirit? Before deciding, ask, from where am I deciding? From the image or from unity? And little by little, what once dominated you will no longer have power. The self will become an instrument, not a master, a reflection, not a center. And Christ, your only real identity, will become your way of seeing, your way of thinking, your way of living. This is freedom, not doing whatever you want, but being who you are. And who you are needs nothing because it is everything. This is the revealed mystery. Lose your life and you will find it. Lose your story and you will discover your origin. Lose your character and you will discover that God never left. He was only waiting for you to release the disguise so he could embrace you as light. Chapter 5. Everything that is not eternal is illusion, the power of discernment. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. Jesus of Nazareth. There is an infallible measure that allows every soul to discern between what is true and what is false, between what should be held and what should be let go. It is a silent rule, a compass of light for the spiritual traveler. Everything that is not eternal is illusion, and everything that is illusion, no matter how brilliant it seems, no matter how strong it feels, no matter how necessary you judge it, has no real substance. The soul that desires to live from the consciousness of Christ, not as a fleeting experience, but as a permanent installation in truth, must sharpen its spiritual discernment, not to judge the world, but to avoid being deceived by it. And this discernment is not achieved through intellect, but through the vibration of being that effortlessly recognizes what is eternal and does not confuse itself with the appearances of the transient. What is real does not deteriorate, does not change with the seasons, does not contradict itself. What is real does not need to be defended, does not demand, does not impose, does not shout. What is real remains, and its nature is as firm as it is invisible. Illusion, on the other hand, fluctuates. It has a beginning and an end. It appears in consciousness and disappears. It has form, but no substance. It imposes itself, but does not stay. It is brilliant for moments, but lacks root, and although it may seem useful, illusion always leads to fatigue, attachment, and suffering, because the soul has confused it with what is real, and has placed its faith in what cannot sustain it. Jesus did not live from illusion. That is why he was free. He could be among crowds, but not get lost in them. He could speak with kings or beggars and see the same, the face of God. He could face betrayal, loneliness, the cross, without losing his center, because he did not dwell in time. He dwelled in eternity, and from there he discerned, spoke, and acted. This is what is expected from the soul that wishes to mature in the spirit, to stop living reacting to what appears and begin responding from what remains. How is this discernment developed? First, through conscious observation. Everything that troubles you today, will it be eternal? Will it exist in 5 years, in 100, in eternity? Does it have its root in God, or is it only in the desire of the self? If it is not eternal, let it pass. Do not hold on to it, do not carry it. This is the principle of liberation for the soul. It is not about solving every illusion, but about ceasing to feed it with your attention. Attention is your creative energy, and where you place it, you create relative reality. But if you direct it to the eternal, to silence, to love, to presence, then you begin to vibrate with the kingdom, and the kingdom does not need to be created, it only needs to be remembered. Second, through spiritual sincerity, the soul must want to see the truth more than be right, more than have momentary peace, more than win, more than succeed in the world's terms. Because if you are not willing to let go of illusion, you will remain a prisoner of what is not, and you will live in a circle where form changes, but the essence remains the same: confusion, fatigue, division. Third, through the practice of detachment. It is not about renouncing everything, it is about not identifying with anything. You have a body, but you are not the body. You have thoughts, but you are not the mind. You have roles, but you are not the character. You have emotions, but you are not the one who reacts. You are the silent witness that has never changed. You are the space in which everything happens, but is not dependent on what happens. You are Christ recognizing himself beyond form. This discernment does not separate you from the world, it frees you in it. You no longer walk as someone who protects themselves, but as someone who observes. You do not react with urgency because you know that what changes is not what you are, and what you are cannot be threatened. That is why Jesus could say, "The prince of this world comes, and he has nothing in me," because he had nothing in common with the illusory. He had no roots in fear or desire or form. His identity did not depend on what the world could give him or take from him. Do you want to live in that freedom? Then ask yourself this question in every decision, every relationship, every thought. Is this eternal or is it illusion? Does this come from Christ in me or from the character? Does this expand me or contract me? Does this bring peace or demand effort? Is this truth or a momentary form? And by answering honestly, you will discover that much of what you thought was important was shadow, echo, mist. But behind the mist, the sun has always been there, and that sun is your being. When the soul learns to discern what is real, drama dissolves, the search ends, need transforms into presence, and what seemed like a fragmented life becomes an expression of unity. Not because everything has changed on the outside, but because you have returned to what does not change. This is the power of discernment. Not rejecting the world, but seeing it as it is, and not confusing yourself with it. Walking through it without belonging to it. Loving without attachment. Giving without fear, receiving without guilt. Because when you recognize that only the eternal is real, you no longer build castles in the sand. You no longer fear the wind. You no longer weep for what passes, because you are anchored in what will never pass, and that which does not change, does not die, does not lack, does not fear. That is you. That is God in you. That is Christ. Everything else passes, and you who can now discern remain with what remains, and from there you live. Chapter 6. Seeing from the Absolute. Do not judge according to appearances, but judge with righteous judgment. Jesus of Nazareth. There is a silent, profound, and definitive transformation that occurs in the soul when it stops interpreting life from the perspective of its wounds. It is the moment when the veil tears, when one no longer looks from the past, nor from the emotion of the moment, nor from the personal narrative. It is the moment when the soul learns to see from the absolute, and in doing so, what once seemed like a problem no longer is. What seemed like an offense dissolves. What seemed like a threat reveals itself as an instrument. Because everything depends on where it is seen from, and while it is seen from the wound, the world will be a mirror of fear. The wound interprets, the wound filters, the wound projects, and what is seen is not the truth, but a distortion. The wounded person does not see the other as they are, but as they believe they must protect themselves from. They do not listen to words, they listen to their memory. They do not perceive the present. They see the past disguised as an aura. And thus, a personal reality is created in which everything becomes reaction, defense, and fatigue, because the soul is not dwelling in what is, but in what was. And while what was remains the filter, the soul cannot enter the kingdom, for the kingdom is not made of interpretation, but of vision. And vision is only possible from the absolute. What is it to see from the absolute? It is to see with the eyes of Christ. It is to see beyond form, beyond behavior, beyond the emotion that the moment generates. It is to see from the place where all is complete, where there is no lack, no guilt, no separation. Jesus saw in this way, which is why he could look at a tax collector and see an apostle. He could look at a woman rejected by everyone and see purity. He could see the paralytic not as a burden, but as an opportunity to manifest good. He was not interpreting, he was seeing. And the one who sees from the absolute heals, not with technique, but with presence. This is the secret of the true miracle. It does not happen through effort, but through alignment, and there is no higher alignment than that which happens when you no longer see from yourself, but from God. But to reach this point, the soul must be willing to leave behind something it has believed to be indispensable. Its story. The story of the wounded self, the self that was ignored, betrayed, repressed, misunderstood. This story has served for a time. It was shield, identity, and explanation. But the moment comes, the sacred moment, when the soul hears the inner voice that says, "You no longer need that story. You are not what happened to you. You are what I am in you," and from there you can see. When you stop interpreting from the wound, you become a clean channel. You no longer project your shadow onto others. You no longer speak from emotion. You no longer act from the need to protect an image. You simply see, and in seeing you understand. And in understanding you free. This is not indifference. It is clarity. This is not coldness. It is real compassion. Because the one who sees from the absolute sees the other as they truly are. Not as they behave, but as an expression of the same God that dwells in you. From that vision, judgment ceases, not because you approve of everything, but because you understand that what does not come from love is forgetfulness. And the one who forgets is not condemned. They are reminded by your presence, by your vision, by your non-reaction. This is the power that arises when the soul rises. It no longer participates in the drama because it no longer vibrates at that frequency. Not because it feels superior, but because it has remembered that its origin is not in time, and what is not in time cannot be hurt. To see from the absolute is to live from the eternal now, not from what the mind fears, nor from what the body feels, but from the presence that remains, from the part of you that does not age, does not fragment, does not need to prove anything. And from there, everything becomes clear, not because things change on the outside, but because you no longer see them as before. You have stepped out of the cycle of interpretation and entered the flow of pure vision, the Christic vision, that does not seek reason but truth. This is living with the eyes of the Spirit. You do not reach there in one leap. You reach it through surrender. Every time the ego wants to interpret, you pause, breathe, and say within, "Holy Spirit, show me how to see this. I do not want to understand, I want to see." And then the veil falls, the form softens, the tension releases, and the situation that seemed like conflict becomes an opportunity, a mirror, a step. This is what Christ in you desires. Not that you solve life, but that you see it from the place that has already solved everything. Not that you overcome the world, but that you transcend it. As the Master said, "I have overcome the world." And how did he do it? By seeing from the absolute, Make this your practice. You do not need to change the world, you only need to change where you see it from. And by doing so, you are no longer the one who reacts, but the one who reveals. You are no longer the one who repeats, but the one who remembers. And from that vision, the kingdom is no longer a promise, but becomes your constant experience. Because the kingdom is not entered through explanations, it is entered through vision. And that vision is only possible when you stop seeing from the wound and begin to see from the absolute. Chapter 7. The transformed shadow, integrating without identifying. The lamp of the body is the eye. If therefore your eye is good, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. Jesus of Nazareth. There is no real spiritual growth without encountering the shadow. The soul that desires to live from Christ, that wishes to inhabit the kingdom without interruptions, must pass through the most feared threshold by the ego, the inner mirror where the denied fragments of the self appear. The dilemma has never been that the shadow exists, but that it is judged, repressed, rejected, or worse, confused with who one is. The ego fears the shadow, but the awakened soul embraces it completely without identifying with it. The shadow is not evil, it is simply accumulated unconsciousness. It is the part of the mind that has not been illuminated by truth, the inner corner where there are still unrecognized memories, inherited beliefs, repressed emotions, false ideas about God, about oneself, and about the world. And all of that, though hidden, influences, operates, projects, and creates. Because what is unrecognized in the mind ends up appearing in life not to punish, but for you to look at it with new eyes and transform it through the light. Jesus never denied the existence of the shadow in people, but he never identified with it. He saw fear, envy, judgment, betrayal, and responded from a place where there was no reaction, but vision. He understood that the shadow was not the being, but the forgetting of the being, and that is why, in his presence, the shadows of others began to dissolve, not because he fought them, but because his light offered no resistance. And where there is no resistance, the shadow does not survive. Do you want to know if you still live from the identification with the shadow? Observe yourself. Do you react with disproportionate force to certain events? Do you decide before understanding? Do you feel shame for certain thoughts or emotions that arise? Do you project onto others what you have not allowed yourself to look at in you? Do you see yourself as spiritual and others as trapped? If so, the shadow is still operating. Not as punishment, but as a sacred opportunity to integrate the denied. Integration is not denial. It is not justifying the error. It is looking at the content of the shadow with the eyes of Christ and saying firmly, gently, "This too is me. But I am not only this. This is in me, but it does not define me." And by seeing it, you redeem it, because everything that is looked at with love loses its power over you, and everything that is judged binds you. The transformed shadow becomes wisdom. It becomes compassion, authentic presence, freedom. A soul that has integrated its shadow no longer fears its humanity. It does not idealize it, but it does not reject it either. It knows that the human form is not perfect, but the being that animates it is. And from there, it lives reconciled. It no longer needs to appear good because it is already true. It no longer demands purity without process, because it has learned that light is only complete when it has embraced its root. This does not mean reliving the past. It means stopping fleeing from what still influences from the shadow. For this, the soul must create space, space to feel without dramatizing, to look without identifying, to listen without reacting, to see the ego without feeding it. When the ego feels seen, it loses power. And in that soft surrender, consciousness elevates, and what was once a burden now becomes fuel. Because the integrated shadow transforms into expanded light, and the one who once descended